Margaret Rose clutched her swollen belly as another contraction tore through her body, her knuckles turning white against the rough wood of the small table in her modest cabin on the outskirts of Dry Creek, Arizona Territory, 1878. The pain that had started as a dull ache at dawn now threatened to split her in two as the afternoon sun blazed mercilessly outside. "Please," she gasped when the contraction subsided, her face slick with sweat as she looked up at the stern-faced woman standing by the door. "Mrs. Winters, I beg you. My baby is coming." Edith Winters, the only midwife within 20 miles, drew her shawl tighter around her bony shoulders and sniffed, her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. Her gray eyes swept over Margaret's cabin, the single room that served as bedroom, kitchen, and living area all at once, before settling on Margaret's left hand, conspicuously bare of a wedding band. "I told you, Miss Rose, I don't attend to women in your condition, Mrs." Winter's voice was as cold as the winter winds that swept through the territory. "It wouldn't be proper. What would the good folks of this town think if I aided in bringing another bastard into this world? You made your choices." Margaret fought back tears. 6 months ago, she had arrived in Dry Creek, hoping for a fresh start after fleeing her family's farm in Missouri. She'd been carrying more than just her meager belongings. A secret grew inside her, the result of a brief romance with a traveling salesman who had promised marriage before disappearing with the dawn. Now, at 22, she faced the harshest judgment the frontier could offer a woman alone. "The baby doesn't deserve to suffer for my mistakes," Margaret pleaded, doubling over as another wave of pain crashed through her. This one was closer. Too close. "Please, Mrs. Winters, you should have thought of that before you laid down with a man not your husband." The midwife turned toward the door, her hand already on the latch. "I'll pray for your soul, Miss Rose, but I won't dirty my hands with your sin." The door closed behind the midwife with a finality that echoed through the small cabin. Margaret collapsed against the chair, tears streaming down her face. The baby was coming, ready or not, and she was completely alone. Outside, the sound of horse hooves slowed to a stop in front of her cabin. Margaret barely registered it until a knock came at her door, firm but not threatening. "Hello," a deep voice called from outside. "Everything all right in there?" Saw the midwife leaving in quite a hurry. Margaret tried to answer, but another contraction stole her breath. A strangled cry escaped her lips instead. The door opened, and a tall figure blocked the afternoon sun. As her eyes adjusted, she saw him clearly, a young man with sun-bronzed skin and concerned hazel eyes under the brim of a worn cowboy hat. His clothes were dusty from the trail, and a star-shaped badge gleamed on his vest. "Madam." His voice softened when he saw her condition. "I'm Deputy Jacob Irwin. Are you in need of assistance?" Margaret nodded weakly, unable to speak through the pain. When it finally subsided, she gasped, "The baby. It's coming." The midwife refused me because she couldn't finish, shame coloring her cheeks. Understanding dawned in the deputy's eyes, followed quickly by determination. "That doesn't matter now. How far apart are your pains?" "Minutes," she whispered. "Please, I don't know what to do." Deputy Irwin removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair in need of a trim. "I'm no midwife, Miss Rose, Margaret Rose, Miss Rose," he continued, "but I know someone who can help. There's a midwife in Copper Springs about 20 miles west. She'll help, no questions asked." He glanced around the cabin, assessing the situation. "Can you ride?" Margaret shook her head, tears threatening again. "I don't think so. It hurts too much." The deputy's face set in determination. "Then I'll take you. We've no time to waste." Before Margaret could protest, he was gathering her few necessities: blankets, a clean nightgown, a small basin. With gentle efficiency, he helped her to her feet. My horse is strong enough for two, he explained, supporting her weight as they moved toward the door. I'll ride behind you, keep you steady. We can make Copper Springs before nightfall if we push hard. Margaret looked up into the face of this stranger, who was risking so much to help her when her own neighbors had turned their backs. Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me. Jacob Irwin's expression softened, and for a moment the stern deputy disappeared, replaced by a man with kindness in his eyes. My ma had me alone, no husband to speak of. A good woman took pity on her when others wouldn't. I reckon it's time I paid that forward. He helped her onto his horse, a sturdy palomino that whinnied softly as they settled. Jacob climbed up behind her, one arm securely around her waist, the other holding the reins. "Hold tight, Miss Rose," he whispered near her ear as they set off. "I won't let you fall." As they rode away from Dry Creek, Margaret leaned back against the solid warmth of the deputy's chest, feeling for the first time since arriving in the Arizona Territory that perhaps she wasn't completely alone after all. The sun beat down mercilessly as they traveled, dust swirling around the horses' hooves. Jacob kept a steady pace, fast enough to make good time but careful not to jostle Margaret more than necessary. Every few minutes, he felt her body tense against his as another contraction seized her. "How are you holding up?" he asked after they had ridden for about an hour, his voice gentle against the backdrop of the desert's vast silence. Margaret drew a shaky breath. "I'm managing." Her voice was thin with pain, but there was steel underneath it. "The contractions are getting stronger, closer together." Jacob frowned, adjusting his arm around her to provide better support. "We'll need to stop soon, let you rest a bit. There's a creek not far ahead where we can water the horse and cool you down." When they reached the creek, little more than a trickle between rocks, but precious water nonetheless, Jacob carefully helped Margaret dismount. Her legs nearly buckled beneath her, and he caught her weight, guiding her to sit in the sparse shade of a mesquite tree. "Thank you," she whispered, leaning back against the trunk. Her face was flushed, her dark auburn hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. Despite her condition, Jacob couldn't help but notice how striking she was: high cheekbones, determined chin, and eyes the color of moss after rain. He dampened his bandana in the creek water and returned to press the cool cloth against her forehead. "This should help a bit." Margaret closed her eyes at the relief. "You're being too kind, Deputy." "Jacob," he corrected softly. "Just Jacob out here." She opened her eyes, studying him. "Jacob," she repeated, and something in the way she said his name made his heart beat faster. "I still don't understand why you're doing this." He busied himself refilling their canteen, avoiding her gaze. "Told you paying forward a kindness." "There's more to it than that," she persisted. "Most men would have kept riding." Jacob sighed, settling beside her in the shade. "Maybe I know something about judgment. Folks see a badge and think they know who you are, what you're made of." He absently touched the star on his vest. "Truth is, I was headed for a different life entirely before becoming a lawman." "What happened?" A shadow crossed his face. "War happened. Lost my pa and brother at Shiloh. Ma couldn't keep the farm, so we moved west. I was just 16. He paused, surprised at himself for sharing so much. "Found I had a knack for keeping peace. Sheriff in Dry Creek took me on 3 years ago." Margaret watched him, her pain momentarily forgotten. "You're young for a deputy." A half-smile tugged at his mouth. 24 next month, old enough to know right from wrong despite what Mrs. Winters and her ilk might think. The mention of the midwife brought reality crashing back, and Margaret gasped as another contraction seized her. This one was different, longer, more intense. She clutched Jacob's hand without thinking, her nails digging into his palm. "Jacob," she panted when she could speak again, "I don't think we'll make it to Copper Springs." Alarm flashed in his eyes. "We're barely halfway there." Margaret shook her head, tears welling. The baby isn't going to wait. Jacob looked around frantically, his mind racing. The open desert offered little shelter, no privacy. "How much time do you think we have?" "Not long enough," she whispered. "Hours, maybe less." He made a decision then, helping her to her feet. "There's an old line shack about 3 miles from here. It's not much, but it's shelter, 4 walls and a roof. Used by cowboys on the big spreads when they're working far from the ranch house." Margaret nodded, allowing him to help her back onto the horse. As they set off again, she leaned more heavily against him, her strength failing. "Tell me about yourself," Jacob said, trying to distract her from the pain. "What brought you to Dry Creek of all places?" Through gritted teeth, Margaret began to share her story, how she'd grown up on a small farm in Missouri, the youngest of 5 daughters. How after her parents died of influenza, her sisters married and scattered to their husbands' homes, leaving Margaret to sell the farm. How she'd met Thomas, the smooth-talking salesman who'd promised her the world and left her with child. "I couldn't stay," she said, her voice strained but determined. "My sisters' husbands made it clear I wasn't welcome in their homes, not in my condition. So I took what money I had and headed west. Dry Creek was as far as my funds would stretch." Jacob listened, anger burning in his chest at how this woman had been treated. "And the father, this Thomas fellow," Margaret gave a bitter laugh that quickly turned into a groan of pain. "Gone like morning mist, probably selling his wares and his false promises to some other foolish girl by now." "You're not foolish," Jacob said firmly. "Trusting isn't the same as foolish." She didn't respond, but he felt her relax slightly against him. The line shack appeared on the horizon just as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. It was a humble structure, weathered planks, a sloped roof, a single window covered with oilskin rather than glass. But to Margaret, it looked like salvation. Jacob helped her inside, where a rough-hewn table, a 3-legged stool, and a narrow cot were the only furnishings. A small fireplace of stacked stones occupied one corner. "It's not much," he apologized, easing her onto the cot. "It's perfect," Margaret assured him, before another contraction stole her words. This one lasted longer than the others, and when it passed, her face was ashen. "Jacob, I think the baby's coming now." Panic seized him. He knew horses, cattle, even delivered a foal or 2 in his time, but a human baby. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, his usual confidence faltering. Margaret reached for his hand. "Neither do I, but we'll figure it out together." Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever happened in this remote shack, they would face it together, 2 strangers brought together by circumstance, united by necessity. Jacob squeezed her hand, then set to work with determined efficiency. He built a small fire in the fireplace, heated water in a battered pot he found hanging on a hook. He tore his spare shirt into strips for bandages and laid out the cleanest blankets they had. As darkness fell outside, the only sound in the tiny shack was Margaret's labored breathing and occasional cries of pain. Jacob knelt beside her, his hand steady in hers, offering what comfort he could. "You're doing fine," he encouraged, though he had no way of knowing if it was true. "Just fine." Margaret's face contorted with another pain. "It's time," she gasped. "I need to push." Jacob moved to the foot of the cot, pushing aside his fear. "Then push, Margaret. I'm right here." The next hour passed in a blur of pain and effort. Margaret fought with everything she had, her strength astounding Jacob. He talked her through it, words of encouragement flowing from him like a river, though he had no idea if he was saying the right things. And then, just as the moon rose high enough to send silver light through the small window, a new sound filled the shack, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. "It's a boy," Jacob said in wonder, cradling the tiny, squirming infant in his large hands. A perfect little boy. Tears streamed down Margaret's face as Jacob carefully placed the baby on her chest. She looked down at her son, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and pure joy. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "You certainly know how to make an entrance." Jacob watched them, mother and child, something shifting in his chest. In the span of a single day, his life had changed in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. He had set out this morning as a solitary man, focused only on his duty. Now, he felt connected to this woman and her child by bonds that transcended obligation. "He's beautiful, Margaret," he said softly, sitting beside them on the edge of the cot. "Just like his mother." Margaret looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears and something else, a warmth that made Jacob's breath catch. "We did it," she said. "Together." He nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Outside, the desert night was still. The stars watching over the unlikely trio in the line shack, a deputy, an unwed mother, and a newborn baby who had brought them together in the most unexpected of ways. The first light of dawn filtered through the oilskin window, casting a warm glow over the interior of the line shack. Jacob, who had dozed sitting upright against the wall, stirred at the sound of the baby's soft cooing. He opened his eyes to find Margaret already awake, cradling her son and humming a gentle lullaby. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "How are you feeling?" Margaret looked up, a tired smile on her pale face. "Sore, exhausted, happier than I've ever been." Jacob stood, stretching his tall frame. His muscles protested after the uncomfortable night, but he barely noticed the discomfort. His attention was fixed on the woman and child before him. "You both did well," he said, approaching the cot. "May I?" Margaret nodded, and Jacob sat carefully beside her, looking down at the infant. In the daylight, he could see the baby clearly, a tuft of dark hair, skin still red and wrinkled, tiny hands curled into fists. "He's strong," Jacob observed. "Takes after his mother." A blush touched Margaret's cheeks. "Thank you for everything. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't." "Don't think on it," Jacob interrupted gently. "What matters is you're both safe now." He hesitated, then asked, "Have you thought of a name?" Margaret looked down at her son, considering. "I was thinking of William, after my father." "William," Jacob repeated, testing the name. "It suits him." He reached out tentatively, and the baby wrapped his tiny fingers around Jacob's index finger. The simple gesture sent a surge of emotion through him that he couldn't explain. "We should rest today," he said, reluctantly pulling his finger from the baby's grip. "Tomorrow, if you're strong enough, we'll continue to Copper Springs. There's a doctor there who can make sure you and William are healthy." Margaret nodded, though a shadow crossed her face. "And then what?" "Back to Dry Creek, where the townsfolk will shun us even more now." Jacob frowned, realizing he hadn't thought beyond getting her to safety. "That's for you to decide, but you don't have to go back there if you don't want to." "I have nowhere else to go," Margaret admitted, her voice small. "My cabin is all I have." Jacob stood and moved to the window, looking out at the desert landscape beginning to shimmer with heat. He was silent for a long moment before turning back to her. "You could come to Copper Springs," he said carefully. "It's a bigger town, more accepting. People there mind their own business." Hope flickered in Margaret's eyes. "But what would I do? How would I support William and myself?" Jacob ran a hand through his hair, thinking. "The hotel there needs a housekeeper. The owner, Mrs. Caldwell, is a fair woman. She might even let you and William have a room there while you work. You know her. I pass through Copper Springs every few weeks on my rounds," Jacob explained. "Mrs. Caldwell's husband was the sheriff there before he passed. She has a soft spot for those who wear the badge." Margaret considered this, looking down at William, who had fallen asleep against her breast. "It sounds like a chance. A new start." Jacob nodded, encouraged by her response. That's what the West is for, isn't it? Second chances. They spent the day in the line shack, Jacob venturing out only briefly to hunt for food and check on his horse. He returned with a jackrabbit which he skinned and roasted over the fire. Margaret ate gratefully, needing to regain her strength. As evening approached, Jacob found himself reluctant for the day to end. Tomorrow they would ride to Copper Springs, and then what? Would he simply deliver Margaret and William to Mrs. Caldwell's hotel and return to his duties in Dry Creek? The thought left an emptiness in his chest he couldn't explain. Jacob, Margaret's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She was sitting up on the cot, William nestled in the crook of her arm. May I ask you something personal? He moved to sit beside her. Of course. Why aren't you married? She asked directly. A man like you, kind, strong, respected in his community, surely there must be young ladies in Dry Creek who have caught your eye. Jacob gave a rueful smile. The job doesn't leave much time for courting, and the young ladies of Dry Creek. Well, they're looking for men with prospects. A deputy's pay doesn't impress their fathers much. Is that really it? Margaret pressed gently. Or is there more? Jacob studied his hands for a moment. Truth is, I haven't met anyone who made me want to change my life. Not until. He stopped, suddenly aware of what he was about to say. Margaret's eyes widened slightly. Not until. Jacob met her gaze, knowing he was crossing a line but unable to stop himself. Not until I saw a woman stand up to the entire town of Dry Creek, determined to make a life for herself and her child, no matter what anyone thought. The air between them seemed to thicken. Margaret's cheeks flushed pink, but she didn't look away. You barely know me. I know enough, Jacob said softly. I know you're brave, I know you're strong, I know you'd do anything for your child. He hesitated, then added, and I know I want to help you, Margaret, not just tomorrow, but for as long as you'll let me. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Why would you want to tie yourself to a woman like me? An unwed mother with nothing to her name but a baby and a reputation. Jacob reached out, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. Because when I look at you, I don't see any of that. I see a woman I admire. A woman I'd be proud to stand beside. Margaret caught his hand in hers, holding it against her face. It's too soon, she whispered. We hardly know each other. I'm not proposing marriage, Jacob clarified with a small smile. Not yet, anyway. I'm just asking if you'll let me be part of your life. Yours and William's. Margaret looked down at her sleeping son, then back up at Jacob. I think, she said slowly, that William and I would be lucky to have you in our lives, Deputy Irwin. The tension between them broke, replaced by something warmer, more comfortable. Jacob gently squeezed her hand before releasing it. Then it settled. Tomorrow we ride for Copper Springs, together. As night fell over the desert once more, they talked of practical things, how to transport a newborn safely, what Margaret would need to start her new life, how Jacob would explain his extended absence to the sheriff. But beneath these practical concerns ran a current of something deeper, a connection neither had expected to find in the midst of such extraordinary circumstances. Later, as Margaret slept with William cradled against her, Jacob sat by the small fire, keeping watch. He found himself smiling into the flames, thinking of the strange turn his life had taken in just 2 days. He had set out as a solitary lawman and would return as what? Not quite a husband, not quite a father, but something more than a mere friend or protector. Whatever lay ahead, Jacob knew with certainty that he would not abandon Margaret and William. The bond forged between them in this remote line shack was too precious, too unexpected to ignore. For the first time since pinning on his badge, Jacob Irwin found himself looking beyond duty to something that felt remarkably like a future. The journey to Copper Springs the next day was slow but steady. Jacob fashioned a sling from one of the blankets, allowing Margaret to carry William securely against her chest, while Jacob rode behind her, one arm supporting her back. The baby slept peacefully for most of the journey, waking only occasionally to nurse or cry out his discomfort before settling again. "He's a good traveler," Jacob remarked as they crested a ridge, bringing the town of Copper Springs into view in the valley below. "Strong, like I said." Margaret smiled down at her son. "He seems to know we're heading somewhere better." She glanced back at Jacob. "Do you think Mrs. Caldwell will truly take us in?" "She's a good woman with a kind heart," Jacob assured her. "And if she says no, we'll find another way, I promise you that." The town was larger than Dry Creek, with proper streets laid out in a grid and buildings constructed of wood and stone rather than adobe. A church steeple rose above the other structures, and several saloons competed for business along the main thoroughfare. The Silver Springs Hotel stood at the far end of the street, a 3-story building painted white with blue trim. People looked up curiously as they rode through town, but their gazes held more interest than judgment. Jacob nodded to a few familiar faces as they passed. Mrs. Caldwell was sweeping the hotel porch when they arrived. She was a stout woman in her 50s with iron gray hair pulled into a severe bun, but her face softened when she recognized Jacob. "Deputy Irwin, it's been weeks since you've graced us with your presence." Her sharp eyes took in Margaret and the baby. "And I see you've brought company." Jacob dismounted first, then carefully helped Margaret and William down. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'd like you to meet Margaret Rose and her son, William. They've had a difficult journey." Understanding dawned in the older woman's eyes as she noted Margaret's exhausted appearance and the newborn's age. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and took Margaret's arm. "You poor dear, come inside this instant. You need rest and a proper meal." Relief washed over Jacob as Mrs. Caldwell ushered them into the hotel. The lobby was modest but well-maintained, with a polished reception desk and several comfortable chairs arranged near a stone fireplace. "Molly," Mrs. Caldwell called, and a young maid appeared from a back room. "Prepare the corner room on the second floor. Fresh linens, a basin of warm water, and bring up some broth from the kitchen." As Molly hurried to obey, Mrs. Caldwell turned to Margaret. "Let's get you settled, my dear. You can explain everything after you've rested." Jacob watched as Mrs. Caldwell led Margaret toward the stairs. Before following, Margaret turned back to him, a question in her eyes. "I'll be here," he promised. "I'm not going anywhere." The relief on her face made his heart swell. As they disappeared upstairs, Jacob removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, suddenly aware of his own exhaustion and the dust from the trail that covered him. "Deputy," the hotel clerk, a young man Jacob recognized as Mrs. Caldwell's nephew, addressed him from behind the desk. "Would you like a room as well?" Jacob hesitated, considering his options. He needed to send word to Dry Creek that he was delayed, and he couldn't stay in Copper Springs indefinitely. His duties would eventually call him back. But for now, yes, he decided, I'll take a room. "And is the telegraph office still open? I need to send a message." That evening, after bathing and changing into clean clothes he purchased from the general store, Jacob joined Mrs. Caldwell for dinner in her private quarters behind the hotel. Margaret, exhausted from the journey and the events of the past days, was sleeping upstairs with William. "She told me everything," Mrs. Caldwell said without preamble as she poured coffee for them both. "About the midwife's refusal, about you finding her and bringing her all this way." Her shrewd eyes assessed him. "That was a noble thing you did, Deputy." Jacob shrugged uncomfortably. "It was the right thing to do, perhaps." Mrs. Caldwell stirred sugar into her coffee, but not everyone would have done it, certainly not with such personal involvement. Jacob felt his neck grow warm. "I don't know what you mean." Mrs. Caldwell's expression softened. "I've seen the way you look at her, Jacob, and I don't blame you. She's a lovely young woman with admirable strength of character." She paused. "But what exactly are your intentions?" The question caught him off guard. I want to help her and William. Out of charity, no," Jacob said firmly. "Not charity. I respect her. I care for her, for them both." Mrs. Caldwell nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. Because that young woman has had enough disappointment in her life. She doesn't need another man making promises he won't keep." "I'm not that kind of man," Jacob said, an edge of defensiveness in his voice. "I know that," Mrs. Caldwell replied, her tone gentling. "Which is why I've agreed to hire her as a housekeeper once she's recovered her strength. She'll have the small room behind the kitchen where she and the baby can have privacy. It's not much, but it's a start." Relief washed over Jacob. "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell. That's more than generous." "It's practical," the older woman corrected. "I need the help and she needs the work." She fixed him with a pointed look. "But that still leaves the question of you, Deputy. Dry Creek is 20 miles away. What role do you intend to play in their lives?" It was the same question Jacob had been asking himself since they left the line shack. "I don't know exactly," he admitted, "but I know I can't just ride away and forget them." Mrs. Caldwell regarded him thoughtfully. "Life is short, Jacob. My Harold and I had 20 good years before the consumption took him. Not nearly enough, but more than many get." She leaned forward. "If you care for her, truly care for her, don't waste time overthinking it. The West isn't kind to those who hesitate." Her words struck a chord in Jacob. He nodded slowly, absorbing their wisdom. "I sent a telegraph to Sheriff Bridges in Dry Creek, told him I'd be delayed a few more days. And after those days," Jacob met her gaze steadily, "I suppose that depends on Margaret." Mrs. Caldwell smiled for the first time that evening. "I think you may find, Deputy, that she's already made her feelings quite clear, the way she spoke of you." She trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air between them. Hope bloomed in Jacob's chest. "She spoke of me," Mrs. Caldwell laughed softly. "At length. Now finish your coffee and get some rest. Tomorrow is another day, and if I'm not mistaken, it may be the first of many important ones for you." The next morning, Jacob found Margaret in the hotel's small garden, sitting on a bench with William in her arms. She wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Caldwell had provided, and her auburn hair was neatly braided down her back. The sight of her made his heart race. "Good morning," he said, approaching slowly. "How are you feeling today?" Margaret looked up, her face brightening at the sight of him. "Much better. A real bed and a hot bath can work wonders." She shifted slightly, making room for him on the bench. "William slept through the night. Mrs. Caldwell says it's a miracle for one so young." Jacob sat beside her, marveling at how natural it felt to be close to her. "He's remarkable. Takes after his mother that way." A blush colored Margaret's cheeks. "Mrs. Caldwell told me about the job. I can't believe my good fortune." "You deserve it," Jacob said sincerely. "All of it and more." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as William's tiny hand curled around his mother's finger. "I sent a telegraph to Dry Creek," Jacob finally said. "Let them know I'm delayed." "How long can you stay?" Margaret asked, her voice carefully neutral. Jacob turned to face her fully. "That depends." "On what?" "On you," he said simply. "On what you want." Margaret's eyes widened slightly. "What I want?" "Yes." Jacob took a deep breath. "Margaret, I know this is fast. I know we've known each other only a few days. But in those days, I've seen your courage, your strength, your capacity for love." He gestured to William. "I've never met anyone like you." Margaret's lips parted in surprise. "Jacob, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want to ride back to Dry Creek and leave you here. I'm saying I want to be part of your life, yours and William's, if you'll have me." "As what?" she whispered, hope and caution warring in her expression. Jacob reached for her hand. As whatever you'll allow, a friend for now, perhaps more in time. He squeezed her fingers gently. I know you've been hurt, Margaret. I know you've had promises broken. I won't make promises I can't keep. But I promise you this, I'll be honest with you always. I'll respect you. I'll care for you and William to the best of my ability. His voice grew stronger with each word. And if someday you decide you could love me as I'm already beginning to love you, then I would consider myself the luckiest man in the Arizona territory. Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. Jacob Irwin, you are nothing like any man I've ever known. Is that good or bad? He asked, a nervous smile tugging at his lips. Good, she assured him, squeezing his hand. Wonderfully, surprisingly good. She looked down at William, then back to Jacob. We're a package deal, you know. He and I come together. I wouldn't have it any other way, Jacob said firmly. He's a fine boy, Margaret. Any man would be proud to help raise him. Something in Margaret's expression shifted, a guard lowering. Mrs. Caldwell mentioned there's a position open with the town marshal here. They need a deputy. Jacob's eyebrows rose in surprise. Did she now? Margaret nodded. She seems to think you might be interested, that perhaps Dry Creek could spare you. And what do you think? Jacob asked, his heart pounding. Could you tolerate having me around permanently? A slow smile spread across Margaret's face, like sunrise breaking over the desert. I think, she said softly, that William and I would both like that very much. Jacob's breath caught. Margaret, are you saying? I'm saying let's take it one day at a time, she interrupted gently. But yes, I want you in our lives, Jacob, these past days. You've shown me what a good man truly is, and I'd be a fool to let you ride away. Joy surged through Jacob, so powerful it felt like a physical force. Without thinking, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, brief kiss. When he pulled back, Margaret was looking at him with wonder. I'm sorry, he said quickly. I shouldn't have. Yes, you should have, she whispered, a smile playing at her lips. And you should again, but perhaps not in front of the entire hotel. Jacob glanced around, suddenly aware they were visible from several windows. He laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. Fair point. There will be time for that. Plenty of time. Promise? Margaret asked, and though her tone was teasing, he heard the vulnerability beneath it. Jacob stood and offered her his hand. I promise, Margaret Rose, and that's one promise I intend to keep. As they walked back to the hotel together, William cradled between them, Jacob felt a certainty settle over him like a mantle. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. This unexpected family forged in crisis, bound by choice rather than obligation, was exactly where he belonged. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm that felt both new and somehow familiar. Jacob spoke with Marshal Collins of Copper Springs and accepted the deputy position, sending his resignation to Dry Creek with mixed emotions but no regrets. He rented a small room above the general store while Margaret and William settled into their quarters at the hotel. By day, Margaret learned her duties as housekeeper, quickly winning Mrs. Caldwell's approval with her diligence and attention to detail. William thrived, growing stronger each day, his dark eyes beginning to focus on the world around him. And each evening, when Margaret's work was done, Jacob would join them for supper in the hotel's kitchen. You're good with him, Margaret observed one night as Jacob gently rocked William, who had been fussy after feeding. The baby's cries had subsided to soft coos as Jacob paced the small room, humming a tune his mother had once sung to him. He's easy to be good with, Jacob replied, smiling down at the infant. Knows exactly what he wants and isn't shy about demanding it. Margaret laughed softly. A quality that will serve him well, I suppose. She watched them for a moment longer, her heart full. Jacob, I've been thinking. He looked up, still swaying slightly to keep William calm. About us, about what comes next. She twisted her hands in her lap. It's been 6 weeks since we arrived here. People talk. Jacob's expression grew serious. Are they bothering you, saying unkind things? No, nothing like that, Margaret assured him quickly. Copper Springs has been welcoming more than I could have hoped. She took a deep breath. But I know how it looks, you calling on me every evening, spending time with William. People assume. Let them assume, Jacob said firmly. What matters is what's between us, Margaret, not what others think. I know. She stood, moving to take William from his arms and place the now sleeping baby in his cradle. But I've been thinking that perhaps their assumptions aren't entirely wrong. Jacob went still, watching her carefully. What do you mean? Margaret turned to face him, gathering her courage. I mean that these weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. I mean that William adores you and I. She faltered, then pushed on. And I find myself feeling things I never expected to feel again, not after Thomas. Hope blazed in Jacob's eyes, but he remained where he was, giving her space. What sorts of things? Trust, she said immediately. Respect, admiration. She took a step toward him. Affection, more than affection. Margaret, he breathed her name like a prayer. I know it hasn't been long, she continued. But out here, time moves differently, doesn't it? Life is harder, shorter. We seize happiness where we find it. Jacob closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Margaret looked up into his face, the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time. I'm saying that I love you, Jacob Irwin. I'm saying that William and I both need you. And if you still want us, if your offer still stands. It does, he said instantly, his voice rough with emotion. God, Margaret, it does. I love you. I love William. I want to be a family, a real family. He swallowed hard. Margaret Rose, will you marry me? Tears spilled down her cheeks, but her smile was radiant. Yes, yes, I will marry you, Jacob. He pulled her into his arms, capturing her lips in a kiss that spoke of all the love, all the hope, all the future that stretched before them. When they finally parted, both breathless, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. When, he asked, how soon can I call you my wife? Margaret laughed softly. Are you in such a hurry, Deputy, to make you mine legally as you already are in my heart? Yes, Mrs. Caldwell's nephew is the circuit preacher. He returns next week. Jacob's eyes sparkled with certainty. Unless you need more time, Margaret shook her head. No more waiting. Next week would be perfect. The wedding was a small affair, held in the town's white-steepled church on a crisp autumn morning. Mrs. Caldwell had insisted on making Margaret a proper gown of cream-colored muslin with lace at the collar and cuffs, and the women of the town contributed to a wedding feast that would be talked about for months to come. William, now almost 2 months old, was held by Mrs. Caldwell during the ceremony, dressed in a christening gown that had belonged to her own son decades earlier. Marshall Collins stood as Jacob's best man, and the hotel's young maid Molly served as Margaret's bridesmaid. Dearly beloved, Reverend Caldwell began, his voice filling the small church where most of Copper Springs had gathered to witness the union. We are gathered here today in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. As the familiar words washed over her, Margaret looked up at Jacob, standing tall and handsome in a new black suit, his badge polished to a shine on his vest. His eyes never left hers, filled with such love and promise that she felt her heart might burst with happiness. Do you, Jacob Thomas Irwin, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? The Reverend asked. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part. I do, Jacob said, his voice clear and certain. "And do you, Margaret Ann Rose, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" "I do," Margaret replied, squeezing Jacob's hands. They exchanged simple gold bands. Jacob had insisted on purchasing them from the town's jeweler, despite Margaret's protests about the cost, and then the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife. "You may kiss your bride," he told Jacob, who needed no further encouragement. The kiss was brief but tender, appropriate for the church setting but promising much more to come. As they turned to face the congregation, William let out a happy gurgle from Mrs. Caldwell's arms, causing laughter to ripple through the church. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reverend Caldwell announced, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Jacob Irwin." The celebration spilled out onto the church steps, and then to the hotel, where tables had been set up in the dining room for the feast. There was roast beef and fried chicken, potatoes and cornbread, 3 kinds of pie, and a proper wedding cake. Even the town's miners and cowboys cleaned up and came to offer their congratulations to the deputy and his new family. Late in the afternoon, as the celebration continued, Jacob pulled Margaret aside to a quiet corner of the hotel's porch. "Happy?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "More than I ever thought possible," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "I still can't believe this is real." Jacob chuckled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Better be real. I've already moved your things to our new home." This was another surprise. He had arranged a small but sturdy 2-bedroom house on the edge of town, previously owned by a miner who had struck it rich in California and moved west. Jacob had been secretly fixing it up for weeks, wanting it to be perfect for them. "Our home," Margaret repeated, savoring the words. "When can we see it?" Jacob glanced at the setting sun. "I thought we might slip away now. Mrs. Caldwell has offered to keep William for the night." He looked down at her, his expression suddenly serious. "Our first night as husband and wife." Margaret felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she nodded. "Let me say good night to William, and then we can go." After tender goodbyes to their son, who was happily being passed among the adoring townsfolk, Jacob and Margaret slipped away from the celebration. He helped her into a small buggy he had borrowed for the occasion and drove them through town to their new home. The house sat on a small rise, with a view of the mountains to the west and the town below. A picket fence surrounded a yard where wildflowers still bloomed despite the advancing season. Jacob lifted Margaret into his arms to carry her across the threshold, both of them laughing as he nearly stumbled on the step. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irwin," he said, setting her down in the front room where a fire was already laid in the stone fireplace. Margaret turned slowly, taking in the comfortable furnishings, the curtains at the windows, the rag rugs on the plank floors. "Jacob, it's wonderful. When did you do all this?" "I had help," he admitted. "The whole town pitched in. Seems they're as invested in our happiness as we are." Margaret moved to him, winding her arms around his neck. "And are you happy, Deputy Irwin?" Jacob's hand settled at her waist, drawing her closer. "Happier than I have any right to be." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I love you, Margaret. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you and William." "You already are," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. "More than worthy, more than I ever dreamed of." As darkness fell over Copper Springs, the newlyweds found in each other the love and acceptance they had both sought for so long. Their unlikely beginning, a desperate ride across 20 miles of desert with a baby determined to enter the world, had led them to this moment, this promise, this future they would build together. And in the years that followed, As their family grew to include 2 more children, twin girls with their father's hazel eyes and their mother's determined spirit, Margaret would often tell the story of how she met their father. How, when she was alone and afraid, an honorable man had appeared like a miracle to help a woman no one else would aid. How 20 miles had changed their lives forever. It became a story told and retold around their family table, a testament to the unexpected ways love finds us, even in our darkest moments. And each time she finished the tale, Jacob would reach across the table to take her hand, his eyes still filled with the same wonder and devotion as on that long-ago day when he had first held William in his arms and realized that his heart had found its home. 10 years passed, transforming Copper Springs from a rugged mining town into a proper community with a school, a town hall, and even a small library. The Irwin family thrived alongside the town. Jacob had risen to the position of marshal after Collins retired, and Margaret had opened a small dress shop adjacent to their home, where she employed 3 young women and created garments renowned throughout the territory. William, now a sturdy 10-year-old with his mother's auburn hair and his adoptive father's steady gaze, had no memory of those dramatic first days of his life. But he knew the story by heart, as did his 8-year-old twin sisters, Emma and Sarah, who never tired of hearing about their father's heroic ride across the desert with their mother and unborn brother. "Tell it again, Ma," Emma pleaded one evening as the family sat on their wide front porch, enjoying the cooling air after a hot summer day. "Tell us about how Pa saved you and Will." Margaret exchanged an amused glance with Jacob, who sat beside her, his hand resting comfortably on hers. "Again. You've heard it 100 times. But it's the best story," Sarah insisted, leaning against her father's knee. "Please." "Well," Margaret began, settling back in her rocking chair, "it was the hottest day in July, and your brother was determined to enter the world." As she recounted the tale once more, Jacob watched his family with quiet contentment. William sat on the porch steps, whittling a piece of pine with the small knife Jacob had given him for his birthday, pretending not to listen but absorbing every word. The twins, identical in appearance but opposite in temperament, sat wide-eyed at their parents' feet. And Margaret, his Margaret, still as beautiful to him as the day he'd first seen her, spun their story with the grace and strength that had captured his heart all those years ago. Later, after the children were tucked into bed, Jacob and Margaret stood together in their kitchen, her washing the supper dishes while he dried them, a nightly ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage. "You know," Jacob said, carefully setting a plate on the stack, "sometimes I still can't believe how lucky I am." Margaret glanced at him, smiling. "Lucky? That I was the one who found you that day, that I was the one who got to bring William into the world, that you chose me." He set down the dish towel and turned her to face him. 10 years, Margaret, 10 wonderful years, and I still wake up every morning amazed that you're beside me." Margaret's eyes softened. "It works both ways, you know. You chose us too, a woman with a child not her husband's, with no prospects and no family. You could have helped us and ridden away with a clear conscience." "Never," Jacob said firmly. "From the moment I saw you, I think I knew. Some part of me recognized you, like my heart had been waiting all my life to find you." Margaret stood on tiptoe to kiss him, her hands damp against his cheeks. "Such pretty words from a lawman. Only for you," he murmured against her lips. "Always for you." Their quiet moment was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Jacob pulled away reluctantly, his hand moving instinctively to check for the revolver he no longer wore at home. "Who could that be at this hour?" Margaret wiped her hands on her apron. "Perhaps it's Mrs. Caldwell. She mentioned stopping by with that pattern book she promised me." Jacob moved to the door, opening it cautiously. On the porch stood a stranger, a man in trail-worn clothes, his hat in his hands. Something about his posture, his uncertainty, made Jacob instantly wary. "Can I help you?" Jacob asked, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used as marshal. The man cleared his throat. "I'm looking for Margaret Rose. I was told in town she might be here." Behind him, Jacob felt rather than saw Margaret approach. "I'm Margaret Irwin now," she said, stepping beside Jacob in the doorway. "Who's asking?" The stranger's eyes widened as he took in her appearance. "Margaret," he breathed. "It's really you," he swallowed hard. "It's me, Thomas Walker." Jacob felt Margaret go rigid beside him. Her hand sought his, gripping it with sudden intensity. "Thomas," she repeated, her voice barely audible. The man nodded, his expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. "I've been looking for you for years. When you disappeared from Missouri, I came back for you, but you were gone." Jacob's protective instincts flared. "You're William's father," he stated flatly, not a question. Thomas nodded again, his gaze shifting between them. "I am, and I've come a long way to find him, to find both of you, Margaret." A tense silence fell over the porch. Jacob could feel the weight of the moment, the potential for everything he treasured to be threatened. But before he could speak, Margaret's voice rang out, clear and firm. "You're too late, Thomas. More than 10 years too late." Her grip on Jacob's hand never wavered. "William has a father. A real father who has loved him every day of his life." Thomas's face fell. "Margaret, please, at least let me explain, let me see him." "No." The word was quiet but absolute. "You abandoned us when I needed you most. I won't let you waltz back into our lives now and disrupt the happiness we've built." Jacob watched the man's shoulders slump. Despite everything, he felt a flicker of pity for Thomas Walker, who had clearly not expected this reception. "I understand your anger," Thomas said softly. "But I want you to know I never stopped looking. And I'm settled now, doing well for myself. I have a ranch outside of Denver, cattle and horses. I could provide for you, for our son, my son." Jacob interrupted, his voice level but brooking no argument. "William is my son in every way that matters. I was there when he took his first breath. I taught him to walk, to ride, to be an honorable man." His eyes locked with Thomas's. "Where were you?" Thomas had no answer for that. Margaret stepped forward slightly. "I'm not angry anymore, Thomas. I was for a long time, but now I can see that your leaving was a blessing in disguise." She looked up at Jacob with such love that his heart swelled. "It led me here, to Jacob, to the life we've built together." "You're married," Thomas observed unnecessarily, his gaze falling to their intertwined hands, to the gold band on Margaret's finger. 10 years, Margaret confirmed. "We have twin daughters as well, a family." She softened her tone slightly. "I'm sorry you came all this way for nothing." Thomas looked as though he might argue further, but something in their united front seemed to finally reach him. He nodded slowly, placing his hat back on his head. "I see." He hesitated, then added, "He's well." "William?" Jacob felt Margaret's silent question and nodded slightly. "Some things even this man deserved to know. He's wonderful," Margaret said. "Strong, clever, kind. He wants to be a doctor someday." A sad smile crossed Thomas's face. "That's good, I'm glad." He took a step back. "I won't trouble you further. I just needed to know you were both all right." "We are," Jacob assured him, no malice in his voice. "More than all right." Thomas nodded one final time. "Goodbye, Margaret. I wish you all happiness." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Jacob closed the door gently, turning to face his wife. "Are you all right?" Margaret stood perfectly still for a moment, then let out a long breath. Yes, I am." She looked up at him, her eyes clear and certain. "I meant what I said, Jacob. I'm not angry anymore." How can I be when his leaving brought me to you?" Jacob pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I was afraid," he admitted into her hair. "For a moment I thought that I might go with him." Margaret pulled back to look at him in disbelief. "After everything we've built, everything we are to each other." She cupped his face in her hands. "Jacob Irwin, you are the only man I have ever truly loved, the only father William has ever known. Nothing and no one could change that." Relief washed over him, followed by a surge of love so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "No," she agreed with a smile. "You deserve far better, but you're stuck with me regardless." They held each other in the quiet kitchen, the unexpected visit from the past only serving to highlight the strength of what they had built together. "Should we tell William?" Jacob finally asked. That Thomas was here." Margaret considered this, then slowly shook her head. "Not now. Someday when he's older he might have questions. And when that day comes, we'll tell him the truth, that his birth father sought him out, that he wanted to know him. But also that you, Jacob, are his true father in all the ways that matter." Jacob nodded, trusting her judgment as he always had. "I love you, Margaret Irwin, more than I can ever express." "I know," she said simply. "And I love you, always have, from the moment you found me when no one else would help." As they finished the dishes and checked on their sleeping children before retiring to their bedroom, Jacob reflected on the twists of fate that had brought them together. A refused midwife, a desperate ride across 20 miles of desert, a baby born in a lined shack, all leading to this life, this love, this family he cherished above all else. Outside their window, the stars shone over Copper Springs, the same stars that had watched over them on that fateful night 10 years earlier. And Jacob knew, with a certainty that ran soul deep, that their story was far from over. There would be more challenges, more joys, more years together watching their children grow. But whatever came, they would face it as they had faced everything since that first day together, their love a beacon guiding them home. As morning light filtered through the curtains, Jacob woke to find Margaret already dressed, sitting at her vanity brushing her hair. 15 years of marriage had only enhanced her beauty in his eyes, the auburn hair now threaded with occasional strands of silver, laugh lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of a life well lived. "Early bird," he commented, sitting up in bed. "What's the occasion?" Margaret met his eyes in the mirror, her brush pausing mid-stroke. "Have you forgotten what day it is?" Jacob thought for a moment, then smiled. "William's graduation. How could I forget?" Their son, now 15, was completing his schooling today as the top student in Copper Springs' newly expanded school. The ceremony would mark his official transition to adulthood after summer. He would be traveling to Denver to begin an apprenticeship with a respected physician, the first step toward his dream of becoming a doctor. "Our boy," Margaret said softly, resuming her brushing. "I can hardly believe it." Jacob rose and moved behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "He's ready. You've raised him well." "We've raised him well," she corrected, covering one of his hands with hers. "He wouldn't be who he is without you, Jacob." The memory of Thomas Walker's brief appearance 5 years earlier passed between them, unspoken but acknowledged. William had never learned of his birth father's visit. In the years since, there had been no further contact from Thomas, and the incident had faded into the background of their lives. "The girls already downstairs?" Jacob asked, referring to their 13-year-old twins. Margaret nodded. "Emma's helping Mrs. Patterson prepare the graduation feast, and Sarah's decorating the schoolhouse. You know those two can't sit still when there's excitement in the air." Jacob chuckled, squeezing her shoulders gently before moving to dress. "Wonder where they get that from." "Certainly not their stoic father," Margaret teased, rising to help him with his string tie. After all these years, he still struggled with the formal neckwear he rarely wore except for special occasions. They moved in comfortable harmony, the rhythm of a long and loving marriage evident in every interaction. When they were both ready, they descended to the kitchen where William sat at the table, already dressed in his best suit, nervously reading through the speech he would deliver as class valedictorian. "You'll do fine, son," Jacob assured him, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "Just speak from the heart." William looked up, his young face so much a blend of Margaret's features and Jacob's expressions that sometimes it startled them both. "What if I forget something, or stumble over the words?" "Then you'll take a breath and continue," Margaret said practically, setting a plate of eggs and bacon before him. "Eat. You'll need your strength today." Jacob watched as his son obeyed, the sight filling him with quiet pride. William had grown into everything they had hoped for: intelligent, compassionate, determined. Though not Jacob's by blood, there was no doubt in anyone's mind, least of all Jacob's, that William was his son in every way that mattered. The graduation ceremony was held in the town square, where a platform had been erected for the occasion. The entire community turned out, filling the rows of chairs set up facing the platform. As marshal, Jacob had a reserved seat in the front row alongside Margaret and the twins, who fidgeted with excitement. When William took the stage to deliver his speech, Jacob felt his chest tighten with emotion. The boy no. The young man stood tall and confident, his voice clear as he spoke of the future, of responsibility, of the importance of community and family. "I stand before you today because of the sacrifices and love of many," William said, his gaze finding his parents in the crowd. "Especially my mother and father, who taught me that true strength lies not in power but in kindness, not in wealth but in generosity of spirit. Everything I am, everything I hope to become, I owe to them and to this town that has nurtured me." Margaret's hand found Jacob's, squeezing tightly. He returned the pressure, too moved to speak. After the ceremony, the town celebrated with a feast in the square. As the afternoon progressed, Jacob found himself drawn into conversation with various townspeople, his duties as marshal never entirely set aside even on this day of celebration. It was during one such conversation that Dr. Howard, the town's aging physician, approached with a stranger at his side. "Marshal Irwin," the doctor greeted him. "Allow me to introduce Dr. James Bennett from Denver. He's the physician who's agreed to take William as his apprentice." Jacob shook hands with the distinguished-looking man, who appeared to be in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Dr. Bennett, it's a pleasure to meet you. We're grateful for the opportunity you're providing our son." "The pleasure is mine, Marshal," Bennett replied. "Your son's academic achievements are quite impressive. Dr. Howard has spoken highly of his aptitude and character." "William has always been determined to heal," Jacob said proudly, "ever since he was old enough to understand what a doctor does." Bennett nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand he'll be the first from your family to enter the medical profession." "That's right," Jacob confirmed. "Though his mother has quite a talent for nursing. She's tended many in this town when Dr. Howard couldn't be present." "Excellent," Bennett said. "That foundation of care is invaluable." He hesitated, then added, "I should mention, Marshal, that the apprenticeship is demanding. William will be living in my household in Denver with one Sunday a month for personal time. The first year, at least, he won't be able to return home frequently." Jacob had known this, of course, but hearing it stated so plainly brought home the reality that their son would soon be leaving them. "We understand, Doctor. William understands as well. He's prepared for the work ahead." Bennett seemed satisfied with this response. Good. I look forward to welcoming him to Denver in August. With a courteous nod, he moved on to speak with other parents. Jacob sought out Margaret, finding her seated with Mrs. Caldwell, who despite her advancing years remained a dear friend and confidante to the family. The older woman had just risen to leave as Jacob approached. "Your boy has done you proud," Mrs. Caldwell said, patting Jacob's arm. "Both your girls, too. You've built something special, you two." Her eyes, still sharp despite her 70 years, held a knowing gleam. "Just as I suspected you would, all those years ago." After she departed, Jacob took her vacated seat beside Margaret. "Dr. Bennett seems impressed with William." Margaret nodded, her gaze following their son as he laughed with friends across the square. "He should be. William's worked hard for this." She turned to Jacob, a hint of vulnerability in her expression. "It's going to be strange, isn't it, not having him home?" "Strange," Jacob agreed. "But right. He's following his calling, just as we taught him to do." He took her hand. "Besides, we still have the twins to keep us on our toes for a few more years." Margaret's smile turned mischievous. "Speaking of which, have you noticed Emma spending quite a lot of time with the Anderson boy lately?" Jacob groaned good-naturedly. "Don't remind me. Tom Anderson is a fine young man, but she's only 13, far too young for such nonsense," says the man who proposed to me after knowing me less than a week, Margaret teased. "Different circumstances entirely," Jacob protested, though his eyes crinkled with amusement. "Besides, I was right about us, wasn't I?" Margaret's expression softened. "You were, as usual." She leaned against his shoulder, a gesture so familiar and comforting that Jacob felt his heart swell with gratitude. 15 years, Jacob. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you found me." "Best day of my life," he said simply. "Beginning of everything good." As the celebration continued around them, they sat in comfortable silence, watching their children William, soon to embark on his journey toward becoming a healer. Emma, vivacious and determined like her mother. Sarah, thoughtful and observant like her father and marveling at the life they had built together. That night, after the twins were asleep and William had finally retired to his room, exhausted but exhilarated from the day's events, Jacob found Margaret on the front porch swing. She had changed into her nightdress and robe, her hair loose around her shoulders as she gazed up at the stars. "Room for one more?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Margaret patted the space beside her, and Jacob settled in, his arm automatically going around her shoulders as she nestled against him. The swing creaked gently as they rocked, the night sounds of Copper Springs' distant piano music from the saloon, the occasional whinny of a horse, the soft whisper of wind through cottonwoods creating a familiar lullaby. "I was thinking," Margaret said after a while, "about that day." "The day William was born," Jacob nodded, his chin brushing the top of her head. "What about it? Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Mrs. Winters had agreed to help me, if you hadn't come along when you did?" Jacob considered this. "Sometimes. But then I remember what Mrs. Caldwell always said, that some things are meant to be, even when they come about through hardship." Margaret sighed softly. "I was so afraid that day, not just of the birth, but of everything being alone, raising a child by myself in a town where I was already an outsider. And then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I was too frightened to even form. And now look at us," Jacob said, his voice warm with pride. 3 beautiful children, a home filled with love, respect in the community. "All because a midwife refused me," Margaret marveled. "All because you were brave enough, kind enough to help a woman everyone else shunned." Jacob pressed a kiss to her temple. "I wasn't being brave, Margaret. I was following my heart. Best decision I ever made." They rocked in silence for a few more minutes. The weight of the day's emotions, pride in William, anticipation of his departure, reflection on their journey together settling around them like a comfortable blanket. "We should get some rest," Jacob finally suggested, though he made no move to rise. "Tomorrow will be here before we know it." But Margaret seemed reluctant to end the moment. "Do you remember what you told me that first night, in the line shack after William was born?" Jacob smiled at the memory. "I believe I said he was perfect and strong like his mother." "You did," Margaret confirmed, "but you also said something else. You said you wanted to be part of our lives for as long as I'd let you." She turned to face him, her eyes shining in the moonlight. "Did you have any idea then what as long as I'd let you would mean?" Jacob cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. "I hoped it would mean forever," he admitted. "I already knew I loved you, though it seemed impossible after such a short time." "Not impossible," Margaret whispered. "Miraculous." Their lips met in a kiss that held all the tenderness of 15 years together, yet still sparked with the same intensity as their first embrace. When they parted, Jacob rested his forehead against hers, overwhelmed as always by the depth of his feelings for this remarkable woman. "I love you, Margaret Irwin," he said, the words as true now as the first time he'd spoken them. "More with each passing day." "And I love you," she replied. "My deputy, my husband, my heart." They remained on the porch a while longer, the swing rocking gently beneath them. Two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed: strength, acceptance, unwavering love. Above them, the same stars that had witnessed their beginning continued their eternal watch, bearing silent testimony to a love that had grown from the most unlikely of circumstances into something enduring and true. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, William on the cusp of adulthood, the twins in the bloom of youth secure in the knowledge that they were cherished, protected, part of a family forged not by convention, but by choice, by sacrifice, by love that had overcome every obstacle. For in the end, it wasn't the circumstances of their meeting that defined them, but what they had built together afterward: a life of purpose, of joy, of devotion that neither time nor hardship could diminish. And in that, they had found everything they had ever sought: home, belonging, and a love that truly had no end.